Are you nervous about the new deck? Oh, sorry.
Ooh, sorry. Welcome to episode 62 of the podcast, fam. We're recording with a new desk today. We're recording with the Rodecaster Pro. It's great to have you guys. Thanks for coming down. If you've been following our journey, there's been little technical mishaps along the way, as you get with any kind of technological thing that gym jocks are trying to learn about. But this piece of kit so far seems awesome. It's our first time with it today, so you might hear some little adjustments and whatnot going on. But that said, if you do like how we're recording this and you notice that it's different from previous weeks, let us know, because it would be cool to get some feedback from y'all. A couple of things before we rip into today's episode. We have got our online classes. They're bustling along, 30 plus classes a week. If you're looking for some guidance in your training and you want a community of legendary humans to belong to, you can join those classes and you can join our tribe. All you got to do is get in touch with us, junglebrothers.com or at Jungle Brothers Movement on Instagram. Flick us a DM. We'll get right back to you. And we've also got our online program that's happening too. So many options there. Training is in a different place right now, but we've been adapting to serve people as best we can given the current situation. So if you do want help, please reach out. Today is episode 62, and we're talking with a good friend of ours and tribe member, Anna McDonald. Anna, welcome.
Thank you.
Myself, Joe Worthington, T, and Paul are also here.
Hello.
Howdy.
The topic today is going into the mental health piece around COVID and around the lockdown and sort of, everything that's involved and how that could be affecting people throughout this time. And as a psychologist, I'll let you introduce yourself in a moment, but we've had a couple of questions come in from people that we're going to be throwing towards Anna at the end of the show. It's a very timely thing for us to be discussing. Thank you for coming on the show.
Pleasure.
Could you start with, you've been on our show before, but could you give a little background on yourself and a bit of an intro, how you came to be where you are?
Basically, I've worked as a psychologist for really many more years than I'd like to try, and it might be reflecting my age. I've worked in juvenile justice detention centres. I've worked in rural outback Australia. I've deployed to Iraq because I've worked for military services. I've worked in pain management, so workers' compensation mostly in pain management spheres, and I've worked obviously privately as well. That's my current work, is mostly working in a private capacity for military services and the general public.
Right on.
Yeah.
How long were you in Iraq for?
3 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Definitely a life-changing perspective. It was really, really interesting. I really like going in those spaces because you get to see, I think, the worst aspects of humanity, but also, I guess, how adaptive we can be and just how people can really bond together and work together. And I met some really amazing people over there. So we had kind of like a little MASH style set up, a hospital there.
Oh, cool.
So you had all these surgeons and specialists and ex-military, because it was mostly privately contracted, just banding together to help people. And it was with very little resources, so it was really, really interesting.
Who would you say that now you work, you obviously have your clinic or
Yes.
Practice?
Yeah.
What kind of people do you work with mostly?
Mostly military at the moment, but I do have private clients as well. And so it really, I get, because I work in Woolloomooloo, you get, I guess, some really high profile clients. But I also do a few bulk billing just to diversify my practice. And so I get people from the other side of the socioeconomic spectrum as well that are unemployed. And so I try to keep it really diverse.
The bulk billing is like through Medicare?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So they can't afford to pay for psychological services.
Yeah.
So I have a few of them on my books as well, just to keep
it real.
Try and do my bit, and keep my practice and my learning pretty diverse. So
nice. Give back to society.
Yeah.
Yeah, is that a bit of for doctors, people in the medical field, is that something that, not an ethical thing, but something that you kind of, because you're building a business and you're obviously trying to, generate income and whatnot, but then you also want to help, is where you choose to go down those paths or somewhere in between. Is that something that all medical professionals have to sort of address or deal with?
Oh, absolutely. And I think most of us are attracted to the profession because we like to help people. So and I think there's a misconception that doctors are really well paid, but I've seen a lot of general practitioners that work crazy hours and have huge responsibilities, and really I don't think are earning
Enough.
No, not when they're bulk billing. And it also shortens, I guess, the amount of time they can spend with these people that they probably deserve. So it's definitely in need of an overhaul. And I think we can see definitely with COVID the impacts of that when our resources just can't cope with the demand. And hopefully that injects some more money into these services. And we're certainly seeing that in the mental health space. So they're opening it up so they've provided some extra bulk billing items. We could still not ideally, the best rates, but particularly when you're running a practice in Sydney, the office rents are pretty high. But at least we're able to do that over Skype and Zoom, and that increases accessibility. And I always think that that's definitely a bonus in terms of helping people and addressing mental health when we expand those spaces. And I think that's definitely some of the benefits we've seen with COVID, particularly.
Is that that's a government funded practice or kind of thing? Like they're giving your industry some money?
Sorry, guys.
That's all right.
Could be a very
Definitely.
important call.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And
And I think it has shone some light on mental health services because we're seeing very vulnerable population groups.
well, yeah, I was going to be my next question. It would be to preempt. I'm guessing an influx in people wanting to utilise your services. What are the
Been very busy.
What are those forecasts looking like, and why?
It's been a pretty difficult space to predict, I think, because there was the Spanish flu in 1918 and that led into a recession in the 20s and 30s, but we're living in a very different space and time at the moment, so it's a little bit difficult to predict. I think they're estimating there's going to be an extra 700 million spent on psychiatric medications. You can cue conspiracy theories. But, it's definitely, they're predicting a huge surge in mental health disorders. The rates of suicide, domestic violence rates are increasing.
Right.
So the statistics have been, I think, pretty alarming, but it's been hard to, I think, gather any accurate data specific to Australia because I do feel we're a little bit more fortunate here in comparison to some other countries where there's some really vulnerable population groups in those countries that I feel just don't have the services or the space to maybe, which we, some people are really utilising this downtime, if you like, or, there's less distraction for them to really, I think, advance different careers or, spend time with family, and they're really using it positively. I'm not sure it's always that possible in other countries. So we've got Job Seeker, and whilst that might not be enough for a lot of people, there are definitely...
There's a lot of help.
Still food on the table and a roof over your head.
Yeah, and the loss and death isn't as, I guess, as glaring as it has been in other countries as well.
But I guess that didn't change the fact that people were still moving into a really... the first 2 weeks of lockdown, there was like a different energy that it was, and it was a collective energy that you walk into a shop or you're talking to people or even friends, family. There felt like, and I'm sure it wasn't just my imagination, that there was this feeling of uncertainty and with that some form of anxiety.
Had like this 1984 George Orwell feel, like and I guess primarily our brains are designed to help us survive, and so if we sense changes in our environment, even if we can logically override that with telling ourselves, everything's okay, it's picking up on all these environmental cues constantly. That people are avoiding us, or now I can't. Sometimes I'd miss the news and I'd come out and I'd missed, the cue that we can only have one person in the cafe at a time, or and everyone's staring at me and glaring at me, and I'm like,
she's infected,
and I'm like, yeah. So we pick up on all of that, and it gives there's an edge to that. We're very sensitive to other human beings and their emotional energy. We pick up on different body cues, and a lot of that's that's subconscious. So a lot of people were presenting with anxiety, particularly if they already had obsessive compulsive disorders and already had health-related anxiety, or
This
they
gets
had
amplified in a situation like that.
social anxiety or
more
post-traumatic stress
susceptible to that.
disorder. All of that was intensified, but I think everybody felt that to a degree.
It's a little bit contagious, isn't it?
Hugely.
Sometimes you kind of have to check yourself and go, fuck, why am I feeling like this? Shoulders up near your ears, and then you're kind of like, oh, yeah, because I just had a conversation with so-and-so.
You could feel it with like you would. I mean, there's people you know in your friend group, or maybe members of the gym and stuff. Some people you talk to and you'd come away feeling like really positive and fun, and then some people you talk to and you'd come away feeling really down. And they were, sometimes the people that just had that different outlook, who were like, oh man, it's fucked. Like, especially the people I know who are conspiracy theorists.
Yeah.
Every time I spoke to them, I felt like shit. It's like, and then, and you can even feel it. You look at stuff on Instagram and you're like, oh, like we're so fortunate here largely for Australians that we weren't that badly affected, or we haven't been that badly affected. And I say largely because I know some individuals have been.
Yeah, of course.
But, there were some really good things to come out of this new sort of landscape that we're in. But then you could look at shit that was just like making you feel super down. So like even for me, where I typically don't ever really think about, like my mental health never really comes into conscious consideration. I did find that some things alerted me to that I was like, oh, I'm not feeling good by reading this or looking at this person that I usually follow or having that type of conversation. Is there something in this time where, like you were saying, that it's amplified for people who have sort of pre-existing conditions potentially, but is there something where people who are generally what you consider mentally healthy or a lack of I don't really know how to put it, you tell me, but were you finding that there were people who were uncovering things that they didn't know they were dealing with?
I think it mostly amplified in terms of I was saying to T previously, it's a bit hard because I was looking for more statistical evidence on what's happening. I'm not finding there's a lot of credible data out there at the moment because it's still all being gathered, and I think a lot of it's
new, isn't it?
It's so influenced by cultural factors, and I'm not getting enough of the real social scientists behind it. It's largely media. And you've really got to be quite careful when you're looking at those sources, obviously. Without me looking at the original source as a professional, it's not very responsible of me to use that. I guess I do feel when you were talking about people maybe you noticed in the gym, you were seeing some of that coming out for people. I do feel that it's a time where a lot of people would maybe feel a bit more anxious or down, or it's a time for reflection. It might have brought up prior traumas for them. But I do believe people are largely adaptive, and what I think people start to adjust. So initially, I think people need to be really kind to themselves when there's these huge changes in their lives that we do take a bit. It unsettles us, and that usually activates different protective parts of us, or different emotions for us, and we just need to be kind and reflective as to what's going on there, and maybe journal or meditate a bit more. And that's the advantage of this time, is we've got a lot of time to be introspective rather than just trying to drown it with Netflix or alcohol or plunge into those sorts of, get completely overwhelmed with it. Because it's really a good time to do that when we don't have the other distractions of life. Or, of course, people are going to be completely devastated if they've lost their jobs. That's a huge shift. That's a huge change. It's frightening, and it's okay to feel like that. But is this a time for growth in terms of, well, can we look at different career options? I'm seeing a lot of people do that. It's really, really good. Or I think, T, you were mentioning before, it's been a place for your business to take some time, and those things you always put in the back seat.
I was just saying to Anna that because she was asking how we're going, and I had a chance to reflect a little bit, and I just thought about what I'm doing right now, and I'm getting a lot of the stuff that I've been wanting to do done within the business, and I'm really busy doing it. and I've got less distractions now, and it seems strange that it's taken a global pandemic for me to be focusing on the areas of my business that I enjoy the most.
Silly, isn't it?
It is silly, like when you think about it. It's like, okay, well, why is that such a small portion of what we do on a daily basis? But I was also saying, but it's not like that for every other gym out there. We've diversified and we've moved quickly, and we're adaptive, and because of that, it's allowed us to get back into routine very quickly and keep progressing and moving forward in different areas of our business. But going back to what you're saying, I think that's a choice, and you can either sit there and kind of like bury your head a bit and go into a bad headspace and maybe use a bit of booze and lots of Netflix and come out the other end worse for it, or you could be utilizing this time in a positive manner to be thinking about how you can diversify if you don't have a job, and what it is that you really want to do, and start moving forward in those areas. And the process of taking action, I believe for myself, is really positive for mental health.
Absolutely. If you can, people are often a little bit too reliant on external pressures to motivate them or create routine in their lives, and it's a really good time to, I guess, challenge some of those emotions that you're experiencing. Once you spend always being kind to yourself, because we're often not. So the anxiety and the feeling down and the low motivation is all really normal. But if you can just be kind to yourself and go, well, how do I work with this, or what does this suggest about myself, or do I need to see a psychologist to maybe look at some of these feelings that are arising for me? Now I've got some time to actually sit and process them. Or now I've got the whole day, how do I create a structure around this to really get some productivity in and use it to my advantage, like you've talked about doing.
Yeah.
It's really, really clever. And routine and consistency, there's
Routine is such a big one, isn't it?
Well,
like that topic as a topic.
I guess if we look at the hypervigilance I was describing before, when our brain's picking up on all these environmental changes, and then that makes...
What does hypervigilance mean?
Hypervigilance is like, vigilance is just the way we scan our environment. So our brain learns to filter out a lot of our everyday stuff. So it starts to normalise to things that we see every day and go, okay, that's not threatening, that's not important. But when things shift and change, it picks up on it, and it's trying to process it all the time. So there's lots of things that we're probably processing that we learn to discard, but the brain spends that little bit of extra time working out whether it's important or not. So your commute to work becomes habitual and routine, and it becomes easy. But if you change that, it just has a little bit more energy to it. There's a little bit more thinking with it. So when there's all these changes around us, like how do we line up at a cafe? Are we allowed to touch people? Can we, and that's shifting every day, or we sense the energy of people around us is shifting every day. Our brain's doing a lot more processing. So that's why and it becomes a little bit hypervigilant.
And do you feel like this has, I'm guessing depending on the individual, it has a different kind of effect on someone. Would you say that can be a bit overwhelming at times?
I think irrespective of, even for Joey, who says he has a fairly neutral... Yeah. it would have still created, maybe it wasn't particularly perceptible, but it would have still created an extra degree of stress in his brain and body.
No. But should hit that button. No, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. But you probably adjusted a little more quickly, or were...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, tell me this, like relevant to that whole piece that you just mentioned. I had a conversation with someone who trains in our gym, who is the kind of person that doesn't really like being in groups of people, and they're very open about that the gym for them is the group training thing is an ongoing challenge that they enjoy.
Which is great.
Putting themselves through,
it's
right?
Great they're doing that.
Yeah. But they're very open in being like, yeah, I don't really like being around people that much. And so I was talking to this person, and it was probably 2 weeks in, and I was like, oh, how are you handling everything, like online classes, not coming in? And the person said, it's awesome. Like,
Yeah.
I don't like being around people anyway, so it's perfect for me. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, you know, you're obviously, whatever the setup is in your brain, you're geared towards this kind of landscape. Like, somehow this is better suited to you. And maybe not, right? Maybe if it went on for a long time, then that would cause them, maybe it could become a negative. But do you find that there are people who are kind of better suited to different circumstances than others?
That's the majority of the people I'm working with. They're loving it.
Right.
Just that, and they're like, I don't have even all the tasks I set for them to do. They're like, I don't have to do them. And I'm like, I'm going to find something else for you. I'm just not sure what yet.
Because you're getting them to go out and be
yeah,
social and groups
all the time, because it is something we need. Where we've evolved to be in groups. We've evolved to be social. It's part of our physiology.
So then, what would happen on a medium to long term sort of view to that person if they weren't delving into those challenges? So say the lockdown thing continued for a long period, what could be a potential outcome?
They'd likely become increasingly isolated, and social contact or social interaction would become increasingly difficult for them to do. So they would get really strong panic attacks or flashbacks, or depending on what I'm actually working with.
Yeah.
And that's obviously very, very unhealthy, and that's obviously something I'm quite worried about for a lot of the people I've been working with. Their obsessive compulsive behaviours have now increased, and it's somewhat difficult for me to say, no, you shouldn't be washing your hands so many times a day when that's the instruction from our government. So it's been a really tricky space psychologically, working around all of that.
That's probably going to get even trickier coming out of COVID as well, I'm guessing.
Yeah,
because, as this thing simmers away in the background, they're going to get re-exposed to the way that we live, and the necessities in life are always involve some form of social interaction. And you'd think that at that point, if you're out of practice a little bit, it's like coming back to the gym, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's going to be fucking harder if you haven't been doing any training
for
over
the
that
first time, or
hurt.
Absolutely, it's going to be really tricky for them to transition to that. I'm hoping, because I've taken them through it before, it's going to be they'll have the skills, so it's a little bit easier, or they're at least familiar with those feelings, so they can work through it a bit more effectively. So, but I'm quite worried about that, how it's going to work out. And
I guess that would be on a global level, really, when you think about it. Of course.
Yeah, that's certainly something that isn't specific to Australia.
Yeah.
But I feel like, given the severity of some of the lockdowns, it will be worse.
Here. Overseas.
Overseas.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because we've had some social interaction. It hasn't been too severe. I mean, just even these interactions, there's 4 of us sitting in a room.
We're 1.5 metres apart, by the way, everyone. That's right. We've got glass barriers between us too.
But yeah, it's true. We've had a very easy run for the most part in Australia, haven't we? Yeah.
Well, Italy were like stuck in their homes for 2 months or something. Couldn't leave your house.
Something like that.
Oh man,
brutal.
And for a culture that would be another it's something to consider. Different cultures have different levels of interaction. Like if you go to Western European cultures, are not as cuddly and touchy as the Latin cultures, and Italy's very family and friend orientated, very social, and to cut that off, it's got to have some kind of social implications, on health.
Oh, I'd imagine from a mental health perspective, they'd be feeling incredibly lonely and disconnected. And loneliness can have the same physical impact as 15 cigarettes a day.
Really?
Yeah. So it cuts life expectancy by about 30%.
Holy shit.
Yeah, that's the long-term impacts. So I'm not sure what that means when this is a short-term period of isolation, but I mean, depending on how long this is extended for, it's hard to say. But we torture people with social isolation. So
yeah.
And certainly even in prison systems, we wouldn't lock people in social isolation for 2 months?
It's like punishment, isn't it?
It's true.
You only a day.
Put them in the hole for a week.
Yeah, in the detention centres, there's really strict rules around it, and they might be 1 or 2 days, and I'd see people deteriorate considerably. They go in lucid and coherent and sometimes come out psychotic.
Wow.
Oh,
Yeah.
damn.
It would trigger psychosis. So,
I wanted to ask before, you mentioned that there's different, different, like obviously different cultures, different countries, but also people of different socioeconomic status will, some people will be more vulnerable in these times. Is there a correlation between affluence and handling this better from a psychological perspective, or not necessarily?
I feel with affluence, you have greater access to resources. So whilst people who are affluent are certainly not invulnerable to mental health difficulties, they usually have better access to resources to help them.
To the good stuff.
Yeah.
You get hold of the good drugs.
And yeah.
Pharmaceutical grade.
It's true.
Education helps as well. It's being able to access information and resources, and that's shown to have an influence.
And have a holiday. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Go to a tropical island or go to a rehab. Whereas, if you're a mother of 3 and you've got no job, that ain't going to happen.
And domestic
Pressure's on.
violence, you're vulnerable to financial abuse, and there's certainly people I'm working with right now that are in that position where they've lost their jobs and don't feel they can leave their relationships because of their financial imposition or different, they're moving in with in-laws or family members that have essentially not been emotionally healthy because they've lost their jobs.
That's tough.
Yeah, and
the stats for domestic violence generally, like when you're moving into a recession, start to go up, and also suicide rates as well. Is that something? Has that happened in the past when we're dealing with you talked about coming out of this Spanish influenza, and then there's been a couple other crashes. So there was, what was that? The 2000 and when was our big global financial crisis?
2008, was it?
Went in a heavy recession over that time.
certainly being below the poverty line has impacts on mental health.
And I guess
and suicide. That kind of goes without saying.
That space gets bigger.
We can't look after our basic needs and physical health. It certainly has a flow-on effect.
So so now that people have found a routine, we're looking at these different kind of this change of atmosphere, knowing that these transitions can have an effect on our level of mental health. What could we be doing now to help prep us for moving into another transition and coming back into the world that, well, I guess we don't even really know what we're going into. I mean, it's going to be similar to where we came from, but the environment's going to be slightly different. I mean, people are going to have less jobs. There's going to be, still going to be some element of lockdown, but there's going to be this re-interaction of jobs, some businesses opening and people using public transport and all the rest of it. What can we be doing now to just prime ourselves and make sure we keep a nice level head moving back into backing out of lockdown?
I guess there's it's really different when I'm working with people according to their individual needs and what I guess arises for them, because people react so differently to different situations. But as a basic, the basics I kind of cover with anyone when they come in is just to ensure they've got good social supports. So to reach out more regularly to people that are healthy for them. Maybe,
so friends, family?
Yeah, maybe restrict others that aren't so healthy. And even if that's just, if you don't feel you've got a lot of good social supports, just even acquaintances and socialising more in general can be really helpful for mental health, even for those people that we discussed. and I think the member you're speaking about, whilst he finds it challenging, he's also aware that that's important for his mental health, or he wouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's kind of like we love eating ice cream all day, but we know intuitively that that's not going to be good for us. You know. it's a similar sort of mentality is obviously addressed. Looking after nutrition, introducing as much stability to the body as possible, because the more stability and routine and consistency we have, the more the brain starts to feel a bit safer. Because you remember when I spoke about before all the changes it perceives in its environment, it starts to feel like because it's new, it could potentially be threatening. So it's going to be a bit on edge until it normalises or learns that it's safe. So whenever there's a lot of change in your life, if you can create as much consistency and stability and routine as possible, that helps normalise the brain a little bit, or it just creates some stability for it.
So you can apply that to your social life, training, your business,
physical exercise,
travel, as well.
Yeah,
is important.
Absolutely.
I think we've done that at the gym. To be honest, like our move to being online was also a subconscious way of returning back to a routine that we were all very familiar with, and us as coaches, our coaches training at the same times, running the same classes, even though they're talking to a camera, to try and bring back as much of the original routine as we possibly could with the tools that we had. I think it's had a really positive effect on not even like looking outside of our membership base, but just our business and the people that work in that business as a whole. It's been fucking great for us, you know. I mean, if I was to picture us not doing that, what it would look like for us now, there'd be a lot of moving into a more of an isolated space. I think coaches would be doing their own thing in the park and staying up later, and we'd have less in contact, and you know the talks and the calls and the interaction would start to drift, and then you know what do you fucking got when the doors reopen?
I wouldn't have liked that.
Oh, it would have been fucking horrible for headspace. Shit.
Yeah. I'm a very social type of person. And yeah, this workplace is very much part of my everyday and my life and everything. And it was a disruption as it was, you know, initially, and then the first 2 weeks. And when we made the move to come all back, it definitely worked for us as staff members and me as an individual, as well as for everyone else. But bring that familiarity back for sure.
And I guess the important thing there is that you didn't, initially you have that emotional response to your way of living and not just socially but financially, being completely, you know, they really put a no gyms allowed out there, but it's like, well, how do we go about this differently? So I want to create that routine and consistency in my life, and these are all the things that are missing. So how do I think outside the square a bit to try and get that happening for me? And that's what's important, I think, just to look at it a little bit differently and see how you can bring all those things back into your life.
I wanted to ask you about routine. You mentioned it before, and just going back maybe 10 minutes, and you said something, can't quite remember, but it was about using routine or setting like just to kickstart something. Like say, I know for myself, I was there and I wasn't doing a great deal for the first 2 weeks. I wasn't training, and I found that with a little bit of reflection and analysis is that I needed to build that routine, and for me to do it, I had to make appointments on certain days to get me going.
Yeah.
And I thought you said something about like, that not necessarily being the best way to do that. Did you mention like a bit of reflection and analysis of why you can't get going without, you said external something.
Yeah, normally we rely on external pressures, so maybe that's
external pressures. So I felt like
we get to work at 9 a.m. because we have to.
Yes, yeah. So I would identify as someone who needs to do that. Well, that's what I kind of came to realize over this period.
Yeah, but then you created that pressure internally.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, you said you were doing appointments for yourself?
Yeah, like I was just like, oh, shit, I need to get going. I know that I can get up for other people if I can't kind of get up for myself type thing.
Exactly.
So I was like, okay, I need to start putting things on the calendar and seeing those obligations and agreeing to that.
Yeah, but you're creating a commitment internally rather than relying on, say, work to make sure you're there at 9 a.m. So that's what's, I think, really valuable about that, is knowing that you don't need external pressures to do that.
Okay, so an external pressure.
When it's internally driven, there's a huge amount of research that shows that when we related to internal locus of control and external locus of control.
Yeah.
So when we feel locus, which is
What does that mean?
Psychology just likes to use these words. It's just like point.
Okay.
So if we have if we believe control is internally driven as opposed to externally driven, we feel a lot better. We feel less anxious. We feel less depressed.
It's empowering, I guess, in a way. Isn't it?
Yeah. So when and that maybe you have more of an internal locus of control, Joey, if you feel like you're less perturbed by things. So if a situation like this comes along, it's not okay that because of COVID, and whilst COVID does certainly mean that you can't run a gym the way you used to, it doesn't mean you can't be employed, because I'll find a way to work around it. Whereas someone might just go, okay, well, they've said I can't operate, and there's nothing I can do about that.
Yeah.
That's an external locus of control as opposed to an internal locus of control.
Yeah. Okay.
That internal locus of control, you also need a lot of you need the self-discipline that comes with that too, though, because it's like a conscious decision that you're making. And
well, self-discipline is
and
actually a belief set, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
tell me more about that.
I think it's a belief set that you can do things. That you have. So there's a lot around the concept of self-efficacy. And again, that's when we're working.
What does efficacy mean?
Sorry.
It's really big words.
Effectiveness.
I'm feeling a lot of anxious pressure.
Stop it.
Too many changes in my environment.
I guess it's just it's your belief in your capacity to do things.
Right.
Efficacy is your effectiveness, is it not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have belief in my capacity to learn things or to adapt or change things. That's the construct that we measure in it. Particularly for pain management, it was really important.
Right.
In terms of their ability, that was shown to be more important than the severity of their injury.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So almost their outlook on the situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Can you train that?
Yes.
I feel like I'm doing that with my kids at the moment.
Good.
Every time they trip over and go, nah, I'm like, mate, just scratch. Snap out of it. Is that the kind of approach you need to take, or would you be?
I think I like to be kind and say, like, I get that you just want to lie down on the floor and cry and get attention for that. That's kind of normal.
Yeah.
But I've seen you do this before.
Yeah,
I've seen you get up and just move on, and
How could you not get up to that? You'd be like, fuck.
Yeah.
So you're improving there.
What about my wife's technique? Oh my gosh! Go get the ice pack and a Band-Aid. She puts Band-Aids on stuff that's not even. It doesn't even exist.
Feels better.
Well, at least your children feel incredibly.
I'm there.
Dude,
I'm all there.
We were down at a little beach near our place the other day, like just a bit of sand at the bay, and it was Misa and I and Hattie, and we were playing around, and the dog. We're playing around in the sand, and then these three young boys came down to fish from the rocks, and they were all like, I don't know how old they would have been, maybe like 12, so they're like little young men.
Yeah.
And anyway, they're doing their thing, and we had like a little exchange. I was like, oh, what are you catching? The guy's like, oh, flathead, cool. And anyway, one of the boys slipped on the rock, and it's not like hectic rocks, but he slipped over and fell on his bum and was okay. And obviously we all turned and saw, because you could hear him sort of fall. And Misa's automatic response was, "Oh, are you okay?" And I looked at her and I was like, "Of course he's okay." I was like, "Don't draw attention to him. He doesn't want that."
Especially in front of your friends at 12.
Right? And then an older dude, you're just like, "I'm fucking fine,"
Paul had a story to share.
No, I was just...
I know you got him.
I was just nodding in agreement. There might be some parallels there between our wives. But yeah, my kids do come running and asking for a Band-Aid, and I get them to reveal the blood, and it's just like a scratch. And they've come to that point. get out of here. You don't need it. You don't need, it's not bleeding, you know. But yeah, we have different responses, and I'm not sure. I mean, yeah, you've got your wife potentially on one end of the spectrum and I'm on the other, and somehow we meet together in the middle and do the parenting thing.
I've used a different technique over Christmas. I was giving awards for the most injured, and we had like a ranking system.
Oh, God.
So they'd come up to me, they'd be like, "Oh, I got a scratch," and I'd be like, "Oh, you've just moved from like cadet to ensign. Well done, mate." After a while, it got to the point where my nephews were trying to hurt themselves so they could get bigger ranks, and I was like, "Okay, we've got to stop this."
Shouldn't put this on the air.
Back to your point about the discipline thing and internal locus, all those sorts of things. I mean, I guess that's a multifaceted sort of thing, isn't it? Because something that we see with people, and it's often it's someone's ability to adapt to change, and we see it with people in the gym, but we also see it with people in business, which, you know, you can see it everywhere, but it's just where we end up discussing it together. But it's people who have the time and energy almost to take on that challenge. So they're like, fuck, this is going to be really hard. Maybe it's they want to start training. They're like, this is going to be really hard. This journey is going to be challenging for me. It's going to cost me, you know, energy, but I want to take the challenge on. And then you get some people who potentially have all the same other attributes, but they're like, no, I can't be fucked. I don't want to do that. You know, so like someone maybe who owns a gym like ours, but they've owned it for 20 years, and they come up to the same hurdle that we came up to with the lockdown thing, and they're like, I can't be fucked going through this process of trying to find a new way to deliver class. I'm just going to close the doors and I'll reopen once things normalize. Whereas for us, we're still very motivated to make things work. Because
I was going to say that depends on motivation, isn't it? Because they're obviously not that financially motivated. I don't know how that many people can afford to do that.
Yeah, it's a good point. But I do.
So if they want to take a time off and just have a bit of a break, and, you know, I'd use that time.
They pay the price.
Yeah, but they obviously can afford to, I'm assuming.
Maybe it's time to call it quits.
Yeah, maybe not, right? They're just
that
like,
for a lot of businesses coming out of this.
Well, that's potentially positive too, because if they really don't have the motivation or enthusiasm behind what they're doing, maybe it's
time to find something new.
Yeah.
Get the fuck out of the fitness industry. Leave it to the young lions. Well, that's not me. That's you guys. I'm an old lion.
I'm a cub. I wanted to ask, you were talking before about making space for introspection, and that's, you know, been something that people may have found themselves with time to do that. What are ways that people can do that, and what do you actually mean by that?
I think a lot of the time our concepts around managing our emotions is just to suppress them. That seems to be a general feel, like, oh, I just do something.
Don't be angry.
Yeah, when we can't selectively numb our emotions. So sometimes it's a good time to actually sit, if you've got increased anger or anxiety or depression, and actually maybe sit and journal or meditate, or get some psychological assistance through what you're going through and see what that's about, and actually take the time to sit with how you're feeling and what's coming up for you. Journaling's really helpful, meditation's really helpful. I think a lot of creative exercises, just, you know, maybe playing music, you know, really taking advantage of that time to be quiet and be with self and how you're feeling and thinking. Whereas I know there's a real increase in Netflix and alcohol consumption, and I think that's a real pity when it's, you know, we've gotten rid of a lot of pressures. Well, some people have, with work and travel and...
but have you seen season 3 of Ozark? Fuck.
Tiger King.
Look, I'm not...
Last Dance? Tiger King.
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing a bit of that occasionally and vegging out, and you shouldn't be critical of yourself if you take time to do that occasionally.
But it's not hiding from that the ability to reflect.
If you're doing that because you're feeling bored or unmotivated or down or anxious, that's when I feel it as a distraction from what you're feeling. I feel that's an unhealthy way of processing it.
But a lot of people are finding routine, like different routine, like healthy routine now. As
Yeah.
well, I've noticed
Yeah.
just going down to the park. We're talking about this on a previous podcast, and seeing how many parents are actually playing with their kids instead of just standing at the side of the park looking at their phone, or on the phone doing work, or not being there at all. And I'm watching like dads on roller skates and skateboards and shit, and
Dad's on roller skates.
I saw
What park are
dad.
you
I
hanging
saw
at?
dad on rollerblades. Sorry, rollerblades.
Right on.
Yeah.
I did.
But yeah, it's been like, it looks like people are connecting again, like families and, mostly families, because obviously you're in the same house with each other. And if you're homeschooling, you need to get the hell out. You can't stay in there. So you're actually going out and spending physical time with your kids. And, maybe your dad or your loved one or whatever. Like there's a lot of, even though that there's a lot of, you'd think that loneliness would be increasing now, because if you're single and you're at home by yourself, you got a little less interaction with the people around you, especially when the lockdown was really strict. But if you're in a house with people, especially family, and you've got more time on your hands, you're actually connecting a little bit more. I'm finding that I am anyway with my kids, especially with my son. I didn't realize that I'd been so busy at work, even when I get home, my head's still at work, that he'd actually started pulling away from me a little bit, and just spending all his time with my wife, even when I'm in the house with him. And I didn't realize that this was actually happening until we went into COVID, and I had to spend more time at home with him. And then because I had a bit of extra time on my hands, I was reaching out to him, and he wasn't kind of coming to me like he was, 6 months earlier, to when we had January and February, the busiest couple of months we've ever had. And I started to realize, okay, well, 6 months in a 4-year-old's life is
Huge.
a fucking, like, that's a huge amount of time. That's like the equivalent of 10 years of my life, you know what I mean? Where I've been distant. So when I'm looking at a perspective thing, so I had work to do there. And I actually saw this happening all through Maroubra, with parents going out surfing with their kids, skateboarding, and just spending time in the national park and that kind of stuff. So it looked like there was a lot of positive stuff coming out the back end, and people starting to exercise more, which is also very healthy as well. So I don't know. What do you
I'm
views
certainly
on that?
seeing that with all my clients, is that their increased family time, whilst I'm sure there's some that are finding that really difficult, being around their family a lot more, as with domestic violence statistics are showing. But for the most part, it's definitely been a positive, in that the relationships with children are usually improving, because they're just spending more time with them, even if that's working from home, so they have lunch with their children.
Yeah.
And so I hope that's certainly, I guess, a practice that I'm trying to get the people I'm working with to continue, even if that means they can push for working from home 1 day a week, or have a bit more flexibility in their time. And that's, I think, something that's hopefully positive with COVID, is that it's
You think people will do that? You think we'll come out the other end
I
with
hope
all these
so.
new habits saying, you know what, I'm going to give
I hope
myself
so.
2 days off and I'm going to have lunch at home with my kids.
Fuck no.
I'm not coming in on Tuesdays, Thursdays ever again.
You wait. He'll be back on Tuesday in like 2 weeks. Oh, what are you guys up to today?
That's what I sound like.
Oh, I'll come in. It's just better when we see each other face to face. I say that I've shared this on previous episodes, but I'm a little bit kind of, I don't know what the word is. I feel a little bit disappointed already, because I feel like we're just going to snap back to what it was. And I don't think this situation that we've gone through, and that's, still playing out, but I don't think it's going to have any lasting effect on the
Big
human
catharsis.
psyche, or all these things that people have been projecting, like COVID, this changes everything. I'm like, it's not going to change anything. That's kind of my pessimistic views on it. Do you feel otherwise?
I guess that's a wait and see. I mean, old habits do die hard. We do tend to snap back into them, and that's something to be aware of as well. That for people I'm working with, a lot of their protective behaviours, even though we've worked extensively on them, if they let things go for a bit, particularly in periods of change, they'll start to adapt those old protective behaviours often, which is basically a fancy way of saying bad habits.
Right. Staying at work all fucking day and night.
Yeah,
Drinking at the pub after work, whatever.
It's been great for them because they might really have difficulty with being assertive, and they have really a lot of anxiety about really kind of unrelenting standards for self, and so they get to work and they can't help but relent to the pressure of this needs to be perfect, it needs to be done, and then they're there till 8 p.m. at night, and if they've and might be enjoying being at home with their kids.
I can relate to that.
Yeah,
I feel like I'm a bit of perfectionist myself.
Yeah, and it's again becoming victim to those external pressures. I guess we were speaking about a bit before. So I hope it's more maybe if businesses can see that people are still being really productive and they're happier and healthier from home, that they can maybe be a bit more flexible and people can actually force that structure in their life.
Yeah.
So if they can just force themselves to spend Friday at home, and that means they can walk the kids to school and pick them up and maybe make a routine of doing something nice on the Friday afternoon, it for the most part, it's not going to stay the same. It's just, it's not. But if they can use a little from this experience and create a bit of structure so they're less susceptible to those external pressures.
I think one thing that will change will be business for sure.
I hope so.
I was speaking to one of our members that works in council, and they're flat out because, obviously they've got to implement all these different changes all over the fucking state. She was saying that they're never going to go back. She's doing all of her meetings on Zoom, and everybody is like, this is way more productive. I don't have to be travelling halfway across town to get from meeting to meeting to meeting. The meetings are instant and shit's getting done more efficiently. And the technology's there as well, So it was interesting having a chat with her about it.
But what do they do then? Do they downgrade the size of the offices that they got 10-year leases on? Like, I feel like we'll be, but in a way, like the infrastructure that we've built around the way we operate will kind of suck us back into... like say you're a big company, say you're, I don't know, Combank, and you've got a massive building in the city, which they do, and, fucking 10,000 employees. And that, objectively that it's like, okay, well, most of these people don't actually have to come in here 5 days a week. They can just come in 2 days. But what do you do then? Do you go, all right,
fire them?
We're moving the building.
It's pretty much what's happening though, isn't it?
We're cutting,
those big companies do that sort of thing. I feel like it's the companies on either end that move. You got the little ones like us who can just flick a switch and change, and those huge ones, they have the money to think about it and time to think about it, and then they just go, we're going to save money over 5 years if we spend $1 billion doing it now. And I think they will do shit like that for sure. I mean, you can see how quickly their apps change and their services change and branding changes.
Yeah, dollar's always the biggest motivator.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if they're more productive, it doesn't make much sense to just keep a building.
Go back to the old ways.
We've got a building, so we'll
I'll rent it out to Jungle Brothers.
Yeah.
It's true. I mean, your points are exactly spot on. But I feel like there's less nimble, even though they have the ability in a way to be more nimble or agile, they're often not. Because you kind of build up all these different layers of command, and it just gets harder to make big decisions like that fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel in government systems and more bureaucratic systems that could be an issue. So I've had some changes in the military space where I'm allowed to sometimes. Well, I can do my consultations via phone or Skype, or they've set up a special because it's more secure. It's actually called COVID, the app I'm allowed to use. Yeah. But I'm not sure if they'll continue with that because they really believe in the face-to-face interaction. But I don't know that it's always necessarily what's best sometimes for the client. So why can't I be, to me, it would increase services that when they're deployed, I could be.
Yeah, you could be in Iraq without going over there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, services definitely.
I don't feel they're an organisation that's as open to those things.
But
it's quite conservative though, isn't it? The army, the military.
I was going to say that there is some. There was like technology has been.
Sorry, Paul.
Sorry, that's all right. Technology has been evolving for a long time anyway, and I thought there was lots of businesses that were looking to cash in on remote everything. There's already people that do remote learning. The rural people, the government is funding before COVID consultations with GPs remotely and stuff like that as well. So it's just like
Hopefully
we're
it
already
pushes
heading
that.
in that direction.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not going to work for everyone, but
Just
this
accelerating
is just
it.
accelerating it all.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's-
but a lot of the online telehealth sessions are only for the COVID period, but hopefully they don't have these conditions around it, because I don't see why it's necessary. We have to see people face to face,
yes.
and if it makes it more accessible,
I guess
making
everything that's
sense.
relative to health over COVID is relative to health outside of this lockdown anyway, isn't it, really? I mean, all the stuff you're talking about, routine, finding, something new, facing your emotions and, keeping fit and healthy, eating well, all this stuff should be perpetual. It's not something that you should just implement over the time of a global pandemic. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
of course.
So the services that provide for this, for us to be working in that place of health, that there should continue to exist, and the money should be going into those areas anyway, if you want a healthy, productive society. At the end of the day, really, isn't it? But that's about budget, isn't it? It's a whole nother subject.
And jobs.
Yes, that's a whole
Jobs,
other podcast.
votes.
So coming out of COVID, it's going to be another big change. Like gym doors open. Let's say I'm a bit more susceptible to these changes in my environment. What are the things that I can do to arm myself with keeping a level head with this next transition? We talked about nutrition, reaching out to friends and family, positive influences in our lives.
Yeah, I think the primary thing is just to be kind to yourself if you're noticing that you're struggling and you're noticing this.
Give me an example of that.
I think people get, I didn't do anything this week. I didn't have any structure this week. I felt really down this week. I lost my temper at my kids several times this week. And it's like, but that's just human. That's what we all do, and it's only a week of our lives. Just notice it, be aware of it, be aware that change, and you may be one of those people that struggles with change more than others, and that's fine. You just be more aware of that, and you be even kinder to yourself that's happening for you, and you take more time for yourself to maybe you're someone that needs to spend more in that introspective time with journaling or meditating or being creative or exploring those emotions or where they've come from and what that means, because when we have these really, really strong emotional responses, rarely is it just about the situation at hand. It's got a bit more to it. And so that just means you need to spend a bit more time processing it and doing that hopefully in healthy ways. And even if you don't for a bit, don't be too hard on yourself.
So if your beer consumption increases over that transition, don't beat yourself up over it.
Just go, that's what I tend to do to cope.
Just swap those beers for protein shakes.
And maybe I need to talk to people about it, acknowledge it's happening, enlist some more social supports.
What if none of that's working for you? Where would you'd reach out to someone like yourself? Or
Definitely.
Yeah.
Because it's obviously going in a direction that's going to, if it keeps going in a negative direction, or you're noticing your reliance on those unhealthy behaviours to cope's continuing, then you really probably need some professional help to get out of that cycle, because it only keeps going in one direction often.
In terms of journaling, someone hears that and thinks, okay, I want to give that a go. That sounds cool. I've not really put pen to paper before. How would they do it? Practically, what would you have them write about? How long would they spend doing it? How often?
I think that varies on the individual, and that might be that you write creatively. Even I just think it's one of those introspective tools that's good. But in terms of processing your own emotions, write about what you're feeling. Write about patterns you're noticing, whether you've experienced that previously in your life, what's happening around you at the time. So you get greater emotional awareness. You get greater insight into we all have patterns of behaviour and thoughts and feelings often, but we're often not very aware of those. And when you have greater insight and awareness, it's much easier to shift them into a more healthy way of coping and processing with them.
That's cool. So sit down, write down, review your patterns. But would you, starting for someone, how long does that process take? And I'm guessing it's something that takes a bit of practice to get good at.
Yeah, some people I work with really have trouble identifying how they feel, and they might come in because they've got a lot of physical complaints, for instance, or they've just got this really, it's become so unbearable they can't breathe, or they feel like they're having a heart attack, or so they're often referred via medical pathways sometimes, and they have a lot of trouble even identifying how they feel. So that's an exercise I might get them to use, where I'm just, even if you can tell me what physical sensations you're noticing, and sit with that for a bit and just try and give it an emotional label. And so they might only spend 5-10 minutes doing that, because that's actually, to them, a really unusual and uncomfortable space.
It's almost be like learning a new language, wouldn't it? Like an emotional literacy.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it. Emotional literacy.
Do you see
It's
that?
so cool.
You guys can use that in the psychological setting.
So if T was going to sit down, he might write something like,
Feel
I
good.
have a bad time being on time for things.
I'm feeling pretty
I
pumped.
am a latecomer.
But I'm really, I'm happy with that, and I can accept it.
He's been not beating himself up for a long time.
I don't want to beat myself up.
That's cool. So it doesn't really matter. Well, it's going to be different what the actual exercise is, but it's kind of like the time spent sitting there and trying to dial in and feel whatever you're feeling, and try and spend some time just thinking about that. Is that the idea?
Yeah, well, some people might be able to do that for hours, others only maybe 5 minutes.
Yep.
Even if you just jot down a few lines, you increase that tolerance a bit like you might with exercise, right?
Yep.
I'm not going to lie. I think I would struggle with that process. Yeah. Yeah, I've done a bit of journaling, and I write shit down, but I've never written down how I feel ever that I remember.
It's interesting
Never done
sometimes,
it.
because you can get some people that seem quite extroverted or would
sure.
seem to have good interpersonal skills, but they really avoid speaking about how they feel.
I've never written it down. I can talk about it, I guess. You guys journal. Do you write down how you feel in the journal?
Not really. No, I don't really go in. I don't go in that deep. My journaling's kind of more of a planner,
Right.
you know.
I did when I first started, because I did start journaling because I needed to, sort some shit out. So when I first started, I'd write all that shit, and there was no real. I'd write half a page or a full page, and it was just part of it's a creative writing experience as well. Like you said, like I didn't feel like I needed a format or anything like that, although I was given guidance. But
Was it like
nowadays,
experiences, like things that had happened that triggered your emotion, or were you just writing down how you actually felt? Was there like a route to the feeling, or?
yeah. I probably, like, how did it all happen?
Yeah, like.
Yeah. I
Were you
was
talking about the cause of the way you were feeling, or was it just
no, it
the
was more
feelings
like
themselves?
no, it was more immediate. It was just more
Just the
immediate in the
feelings
present.
themselves.
Yeah, or anything the day before and the day after, because when you do it, you're doing it every day. So when you start, you might be talking about something more broader, but then it just becomes how you're feeling at that time.
So what did you do with the information? Are you supposed to read it back and review, or is it just you write it and then you walk
just
away?
it's just in a book somewhere. I mean, you might flick back over it. I mean, what I was going to say was what I did then is different to what I do now, and it might always change depending on what I feel I need to do with it. At that time, it was just write whatever. It's just in a page, and then over time, it turned into a bit of a mantra or something. There was a couple of lines where I liked to repeat to reinforce some ideas that I had kind of defined over weeks and months going, oh, I like that. I like hearing that every day. So then I put that into, so then I might look back at that and repeat it. But
I like a little trigger.
yeah, exactly. Nice. Little reminder type thing. But it's
and
different
also
now.
it goes hand in hand with routine as well.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I like that it's daily.
Yeah.
I think that's for all of these habits. It's good to try for daily and and have it and do it at a certain time of day, rather than wait for something to happen to trigger that behaviour.
Yeah.
Right.
When we're trying to introduce new behaviours, it's really important to make it part of your routine
Small
because
and
they're just
often.
not going to happen otherwise.
Yeah, but
And link it with something like, okay, I'll journal when I have my morning coffee.
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
I'll do that just before bed, or so link it with part of your routine already.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's more of a daily. It feels like more of a planner sometimes now. It's not like as deeply emotional as it was when it started type thing. But with this podcast, I'm sitting here thinking, oh, I might have a crack going back there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you feel like it helped you get through anything in particular, or?
I was a long time, it was years ago, but definitely. Yeah, it was a huge part. And I remember finishing my first full book, and it, you know, I had like a freaking moleskin or whatever, and it took like maybe 2 years to actually fill the whole thing. And I went back, and it was Drew. Remember Drew? And I messaged him because I had written a note at the back of my journal to say, hey, make sure you let Drew know when you finish your first book. And I did that. And I've since texted him a few times when I know that journaling has helped me, and I'm like, just letting you know, you're the one who fucking started this. Yeah, it's been really helpful.
Right.
Yeah,
It
really
actually, exercising a different part of your brain. So when you actually physically write something, so I think some people, because it's easier, I get them to put things in their phone just if they're a little bit more resistant to the idea. But I think there's certainly something different about, and that's been shown by research, is that when you actually physically write something, it uses a different part of your brain. It conceptualizes it differently. You process it differently. You slow down the thinking. But you're just giving yourself that time. It's like a kind of, you know, we hear a lot of self-love, and it's like, well, how do we self-love? It's just by giving ourselves that time and attention. And we spend very little time on our emotional health.
Yeah, I remember you telling me to do that a long time ago. Like when we first started and we were giving each other tasks, and I was just jotting them into my phone. And you said you need to get a diary and write it down, because I wasn't actually getting any of my tasks done. Yeah. And when I started doing that, I actually, started doing the tasks, which was interesting, you know. I didn't think anything of it when you told me, like, oh, fucking hell, this guy. All right. So I start writing it down, and then I'm like, holy shit, I'm actually doing these things. It's great.
Yeah,
It's true. Pen to paper is powerful.
Paper, yeah, totally.
Yeah,
I want that
amazing?
study so I can carry it with me and I can tell people, because it's so true, you know.
I mean, one of them I think is just having that, like a centralized place where thoughts and plans and stuff go, which is a notebook. But you put something on a phone or a computer, it can go to any one of hundreds of different places. And so you don't, the recourse to actually look at that thing or refer to it, it's actually very unlikely that you will refer to it. Whereas if you have the one thing, like a journal that you look at every day, like you're forced to go back to it. So I find that, I've always found the pen to paper thing really powerful.
There's even, it's more of a psychodynamic exercise where they'll do things like we look at our formative trauma, and that usually being embedded in our attachments when we're younger. And so we write, because we might not have had nurturing attachments when we're younger, and probably won't necessarily have them in our immediate family. We try to become that nurturer for ourselves. And so they write a letter to self in, I can't remember, write a letter as a child in left hand and one in the right hand. And so there's a highly personal aspect to it in terms of it representing different. So it's like a healing process where you're talking to that inner child. And
you're
there's
actually
a lot
writing
of
a letter to yourself and to different...
And then you're trying to address the trauma as yourself, as like your...
Wow.
Yeah,
That sounds very confronting to me. Not that I've had a troubled childhood.
That was convincing.
There, Tiora.
But what
But it's
if
highly
your
personal.
left hand looks the same as your right hand writing? Which I also have the problem with. I wouldn't be able to decipher which one's the child and which one's the adult.
I'm not sure we've looked into that much too.
Hey, let's get to a 10-pack with Anna. After.
Could be, yeah.
10-pack.
Hey, I thought that's 3 phone rings we've had from the crew.
That's it.
We had a question come through from the tribe, but you kind of already covered it, which was really someone mentioning that they were feeling a bit anxious about this whole lockdown thing initially. Now they're feeling pretty good about it. They found that mindfulness and daily routines have helped them just sort of, get on with everything and
Perfect.
settle. But now that things are changing again, they're starting to feel a little bit anxious once more. And I think and particularly in regards to knowing that the virus is still out there somewhere. Obviously that's kind of been the basis of what we've been talking about. In closing, is there anything you wanted to add to that in response or,
I guess again, just acknowledging that that's pretty normal, and if they gradually work into, if we're gradually working in that area of discomfort, that's actually our optimal health. So feeling happy all the time or content or calm all the time isn't normal, and we actually don't like that. We like to be challenged, and I guess if they're just be kind, gentle with self, keep up the mindfulness practices. It's great that they've got that in routine. Hopefully they can continue with that. But they'll probably find they adjust. Because of course it's scary if you're, and your brain's making all these subconscious associations and you get all this media attention to something that I think really exacerbates the risk and the danger. I actually find looking at data really helpful. So not necessarily media, but actually looking at the science behind it. And the risk isn't that high. I understand why.
of contracting the
Yeah,
virus?
I understand why the government's putting all these measures in place, but it makes the risk seem much higher than it actually is. So if you can tell yourself that, if you actually look at what the actual risk is.
That you face a lot of other bigger risks every day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We make those risks every day. Getting in our car is a much bigger risk. And that's the logical part. Of course, the emotional part is highly agitated because our world's changed considerably and will be changing again. And of course, that will make you more anxious, but you will adjust. So you just have to push into that discomfort a little, acknowledge that it's normal. And if we observe our emotions more, and that's what you do when you're journaling, it's like you're putting it on the page. You're seeing it. That's what you do when you meditate. It's not like let's get rid of this emotion. It's just observing that anxiety, that agitation, being a bit curious about it, knowing that's a normal, and that sometimes it's actually healthy. So and our brains are designed to protect us. So of course, their brain is getting fearful and anxious about what's out there and is trying to protect them. But is it really? And it's also reacting to the fact that everybody around us is agitated and anxious and fearful. But if you can just have awareness of that and actually know that the risk of you doing, and taking calculated risks, the risk of you doing that is maybe 1 in 4 million or something, as opposed to the risk of getting in the car, which is, I think, much higher. Then hopefully you can feel a bit more confident about it.
Where can, if people want to get in touch with you, is there a central place you can send them to?
I'm mostly, I don't really advertise, so I know you've got my number.
Yeah, cool.
just Google me. Yeah, I've got a contact number there, but I don't really have a lot of advertisements or anything out there. And it's
Cool. Like to keep it that way?
Yeah.
I guess you're busy enough as it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't put a lot of thought into marketing.
Cool. It must be a nice place to live. I say that because my head's in marketing 24/7.
Yeah.
And thanks for coming on the show today.
Pleasure.
We appreciate you making the time, and you're doing a good thing for people out there, and we appreciate you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Thanks, fellas. Thanks for listening, guys. That was episode 62 of the JB podcast. If you liked that episode and you feel like it was beneficial take a screenshot of it, post it on your Instagram stories, tag us, just do something to help spread the word because that helps support the show. If you want to get in touch with us, you can find us at junglebrothers.com or on Instagram at Jungle Brothers Movement. Hopefully, gym's going to be open in a couple of months, maybe sooner, maybe later, who knows. But we'll be ready for it. And if you want to talk about you being ready for it too, definitely reach out. And we got all different ways that we can help you. So thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week. Peace.